Okay, and there we go. There it is, my scale model build of the place. That has taken me around 5 or so hours to build today. Now, if only the real thing would take me that long to build. So, here we are at the very beginning. It's finally time for me to start building the place. Now, although the heart and soul of the Places series is about me delivering adaptive, dynamic music soundtracks in a new way, there are actually many other aspects to this production that I need to work through in order to bring that to life. First and foremost, yes, there is the music, but there's also the interactive tech, the lighting, and the moving parts. It's each of these elements that will help me build an environment that people can step into, where their movements, explorations, and curiosity actually forms and shapes the music soundtrack, which is what the Places series is all about. But the glue that brings all of this together, or should I say cardboard, is the actual physical model itself. Cardboard is literally the medium that this experience is suspended within. So today I'm going to start right there. I need to start figuring out the size and shape of the place. Once that's been established, I can then begin to define the wider experience based on what the designs can accommodate. And from there, run headfirst into all the other creative madness that's going to surround this production. Sorry, what was that? Where is the place going to live when it's finished? Okay, good question. Let me show you. Okay, so as mentioned in the previous episode, my lead partner supporting production of the place is none other than Theatr Clwyd. And I really could not have hoped for a better lead partner in this production. First opened in 1976, Theatr Clwyd is a regional art centre and producing theatre based in Mold in the northeast of Wales. And they're not just hosting the installation, they're championing it and giving it room to grow and be seen by tens of thousands of people when it's finished. And their newly redeveloped venue is going to be genuinely stunning. In fact, I'll never forget the moment I felt really compelled to share my proposal for the place with them, because it was when I found out about the environmental considerations that underpin the current redevelopment of their venue. Once the redevelopment of Theatr Clwyd is completed, the venue will operate entirely without fossil fuels, which will see the building being powered by 100% renewable electricity, which is just incredible. It's such a great standard to set anywhere, really, let alone in the cultural sector. Now, the construction methodologies behind the Places series were developed with sustainability considerations in mind as well, with the models not only being constructed from cardboard, but waste cardboard, which I collect from local businesses who spend a small fortune paying for it to be disposed of weekly. So yeah, the prospect of the technical side of the Places series being powered by 100% renewable electricity was just incredibly inviting. And yeah, it really connected with my own desire to expand the sustainability efforts behind the Places series. So during initial conversations with Theatr Clwyd, they very kindly provided me with a copy of the floor plans of the new version of their venue, with focus on this area here, the gallery. However, the gallery in their venue is no typical gallery space. Usually a gallery would be a white box or a black box space, often annexed at the end of some corridor or tucked away in some corner of the venue. Theatr Clwyd's new gallery space, however, serves more as a cultural main street within their venue. So it's a space you can travel through as opposed to a space that you would have to consciously seek out. So ultimately, there will be lots of people passing through this space in order to connect with various other aspects of the theatre. And it's this unique flow of foot traffic that I need to keep in mind as I design the layout for the place. Now, the most basic way to incorporate the place within this environment would be for it to simply straddle the walls of the gallery. However, in this formation, the work would serve more as a decoration or a facade to the existing straight passageway that the gallery describes. Now, to me, this approach wouldn't feel very immersive, nor would it allow the work to establish its own space, and blur the boundaries between the environment of the gallery and the environment that the place is trying to invite you into. Instead, I believe that the place should establish more of a meandering path, allowing the work to extend out from the walls in some areas and push in tighter in other areas. Not only will this make the path of travel longer throughout the work, increasing the economy of the real estate that it will occupy, but it'll also enable me to establish interesting layered vistas when the work is viewed from many different angles as people pass through it. And I'll demonstrate what I mean by that in more practical detail later in this episode. But I feel that this will be key to creating a piece of work that feels much bigger than it actually is, even though it's going to be quite big anyway, helping to increase the immersive potential and to establish a world that you clearly come into and out of, as opposed to creating something that you simply stand near or pass by. Because of all these considerations, I've been thinking about this through the lens of something called rhythm analysis, established by writer and philosopher Henri Lefebvre. He suggested that spaces have rhythms, not just the physical kind, but social and bodily ones too. So the way people walk, pause, glance, move as a crowd, it's all part of a rhythm that shapes how we experience a place. So if my designs for the place were to simply follow the straight lines of the gallery, I'd just be echoing that rhythm. But by introducing a more winding path, I can interrupt it or play with it, so that the experience of the place isn't just about walking through, it's about slowing down or looking sideways, maybe even turning back. And that's where the immersion begins. So with all of that in mind, I think my next step is to build a super rough scale model of the place. Yeah. Doing that should help me expand this two-dimensional footprint here from the floor plans into a 3D plan that can help me figure out the volume of the work and better understand the space it's going to occupy. So yeah, I think I'm going to get to the workbench and get right on that now. It's time to start making something with some cardboard. Oh, my tea. I need my tea. So here it is. I now have a quick and dirty scale model of what the actual place could look like. So let me walk you through this thing. The area that the place can occupy in the real world gallery is approximately 10 meters long by 5.2 meters wide by 2.7 meters tall. So based on those real world dimensions, I built this scale model room to be 500 millimeters long by 260 millimeters wide by 135 millimeters tall, meaning that this model represents a 1/20th scale. Now, although I've built this scale model to look somewhat like a descriptive miniature with tiny windows, doorways, and other ornaments, these details here are actually pretty much arbitrary at this stage. Because right now I'm solely doing this to establish a rough draft of the volumetric footprint, to see which areas might be top heavy or bottom heavy, which bits might be shallow, which bits might be steep, which bits creep out into the room and which bits extend up to the ceiling, or even which bits are freestanding. Oh, yes! So I mentioned vistas earlier in this episode as well. So hopefully now I can show you what I mean by that. Okay, so it's time for me to pull a little bit of some Hideo Kojima magic right now. So if we lower down my phone camera here, then looking through the left side of the gallery, we have this vista here. And then if we lower my camera down through the right side of the gallery, we have this completely different vista. And then there's the vistas that would be generated if you were stood in the middle of the place, looking across in various different directions, like this. And like this. Or like this. Wow, this is really cool. I can kind of see why Hideo Kojima did this for figuring out the camera angles in Metal Gear Solid. So this feels like the very first time I've ever stood inside the Playce, which is kind of cool. Okay. Again, none of these ideas are finalized here in this draft scale model build, but I'm beginning to see how these different building clusters and bridges and columns and shapes, they're all helping to establish some really interesting, lovely parallax layers that help lead the eye through some interesting perspectives and vistas. And it's that that's going to help make you feel like you've genuinely entered a different space, you know, a totally different world. Yeah, okay. That's starting to feel quite promising. Some of these ideas are going to need some more exploration, naturally, especially as I start working on the full scale build of the Playce. But we're on to something with this, I think. The other things this scale model build is helping me begin to assess is certain accessibility considerations. Using this 1/20th scale model analog, I can start to also think about what it's like to walk through this space as a 6-foot person or as a small child. This is really important because when I begin to distribute the interactive and reactive elements throughout the Playce, I need to ensure that there's a fair distribution of these features for individuals of differing heights to be able to access. I also need to ensure that any of the pathways through the Playce never drop below 1.2 meters in width to ensure wheelchair access safely through the space as well. And now that this scale model is inspiring me to think about this level of detail, it's probably a good idea for me to start sketching out some designs that provide a more illustrative view of the Playce, because some of these deeper considerations are dependent on detail that sits at this finer resolution of design. I think I need to get out of the studio for this next job though. I've been a little cooped up in here for the last few days. So tomorrow I think I'm going to take this next task with me outside for some fresh air. So, using the scale model as a loose reference point, I'm going to take some time today to begin sketching out some detailed illustrations and general ideas for the place. Now, at this stage in the process, the goal isn't really to land on any final designs for the work. It's more about exploring some potential shapes and silhouettes and structural arrangements that are conducive to the world that I'm trying to build. So today, this process is just a free exploration, really. Sketching is absolutely where the finer details can start to emerge. It's where ideas for a world can start to feel real. So this is going to feel really satisfying today, because a lot of this stuff has been stuck in my head for quite a long time. In fact, I don't think I've fully processed that this project is even happening. But it is, finally. So I've been going at this process now for about an hour or so, and yeah, I've just been fairly mindlessly sketching and painting out some general ideas. And the general composition of them so far has been inspired by what worked well with one of my first ever Playce's models, which was the windmill. The windmill is a pretty whimsical structure. When I built that model all those years ago, I was trying to create something that could be real, but also something that was bordering on nonsensical or slightly illogical or inconvenient in its design. So yeah, there were lots of tiny dwellings that were inefficiently stacked up on top of each other, passageways and pathways that worked harder than they needed to. And I found that all of these approaches to the visual composition really helped draw people into the environment much more effectively, and for far longer than any of the other Playce's models had managed to. This approach to the design also made it much easier to distribute the soundtrack throughout the environment, with various layers of the soundtrack living in different areas and recesses and buildings scattered throughout the model. So yeah, that existing visual style from the windmill is absolutely going to translate across to the large scale build of the place, like without a doubt. The other thing that people really enjoyed about the windmill was the overall aesthetic, which could be summed up as organic village meets soft industrialization. And I must say, I'm also really fond of that aesthetic myself. It reminds me of things like Howl's Moving Castle, or Fisherman's Horizon from Final Fantasy VIII. And that combination of folk and tech, it's both cozy and corroded, if that makes sense. And that formula lends itself really well to the Playces series because it enables the interactive and technical aspects of the experience to gel really effectively with the visual aesthetic of the work. It's electricity meets wood, you know? It's solar panels meets washing lines. It's that kind of thing. Working through these drawings and paintings today has reminded me of something known as the technological disobedience movement. If you're not familiar with it, it's a movement that is most closely associated with Cuba, where decades of trade restrictions and supplies and product shortages forced the hands of communities to become radically inventive with whatever materials or devices they had on hand. And this saw people building rooftop water systems out of scrap plastic barrels, constructing antennas and satellite dishes from salvaged metal sheets and tin cans, and even reinforcing entire homes using parts of abandoned vehicles or shipping containers. It's a needs-must approach, where things are hacked together or repurposed or entirely reimagined out of necessity. And the whimsy that emerges from that kind of resourceful ingenuity is yet another thing that aligns really well with the world of the place. So I want to make sure I identify some appropriate opportunities to reference this movement within these designs wherever possible. So I think I'm going to stop there for today. It's been such a lovely day getting to sit outside and, yeah, sketch and paint for a change. I could very easily lose so much time to this process right now, but I definitely need to hold off on creating any finished designs just yet. There are a couple of other things that I need to figure out for this production before I do that. But for now, this has definitely been a really useful starting point for the designs. And it's nice to see some of the things that have been held in my head for so long starting to exist in the real world for the very first time. Well, on paper at least. So that marks the end of the beginning. I think all of these explorations from this episode has left me with more than enough to get started on the foundational build of the place. As we move further into the production, I fully expect these ideas to develop further and even change naturally. There are still plenty of unknowns about this work, but for the most part, they pertain to details around some of the interactive features of the place. And when those ideas start to properly emerge, they'll begin to influence the composing of the dynamic music soundtrack, and vice versa for that matter. There will absolutely be elements to the music soundtrack that will inspire revisions to the visual design of the place as well. So yeah, this has been a really, really rewarding, and dare I say it, useful step in the process for the production of the place so far. I have to say, there are already tons of new ideas swirling around in my mind as a result of the processes in this episode. But that is all to come in upcoming episodes in this series. After all, we're only just getting started. If you enjoyed this episode in the Playces series, then please consider dropping a like down below. And if you want to stay up to date with this production, then consider subscribing to the channel as well. It would be lovely to have you along for the journey, it really would. And please feel free to leave a comment too. I'd love to hear what you think about some of the ideas we explored in this episode, or answer any of the questions you might have about the place. Fire away. Thanks for watching, folks, and until next time. This is my life now, isn't it?